A Springborn Childhood by Gerald Smart, recorded in 2004. I better just explain where Springborn is. The Springborn I'm talking about is along Holderness Road, running from the central station to about Curzon Road and St Mary's Church. To the south it goes to the railway line, or Wyndham Road, and to the north it goes to Bennett Road. The only place I know of in Springborn that has that name in it is Springborn Library, which is still there. I was born in Boscombe Hospital in Shelley Road in 1930. After the appropriate time I went home to my house with my mum, and my house was a semi-detached at 25 Shelbourne Road, where I lived with my mum and dad and 3 sisters. I was literally at that time, and still am, the baby of the family. We there lived in one room at the front of the house downstairs. At some time before I was born, the 5 other members of the family all lived at and slept in that room, but by the time I arrived we had bedrooms upstairs. In the middle room of the house my grandfather lived, my dad's dad that is. He lived in that room which we called the kitchen, and he slept there, and he had a daughter whose name was Hilda, who we called Dilly, my dad's sister. She lived there and looked after him and did the cooking, and she had a room upstairs to sleep in. The back room of the house was quite small, and it was what we called the scullery. In there was a small sink, a small gas cooker, a small copper, and 1 or 2 shelves to put things on. There was also a door leading into what was originally supposed to be a larder, but in that time was used by my grandpa as a coal house to keep his coal and paraffin and other bits and bobs in. Our coal was kept in a cupboard under the stairs. Now there was no electricity to power lights or anything in the house till around 1937. In the kitchen where my grandpa lived there was a gas light, and I think there was some sort of gas lamp in the hallway, but I don't recall it ever being lit. So all of our lighting was done by the means of oil lamps, a large one to go on the centre table in the front room, 1 or 2 smaller ones to take elsewhere. Otherwise we used candles. To add to the safety of the situation, we also had coal fires, and of course we had real candles lit on the Christmas tree. On a board at the front of the house there was a notice saying C.W. Smart, outside porter. The C.W. Smart on the board was my grandfather, whose name was Charles William, the same as my dad's. Now his job as an outside porter was to wait at the central station and load any luggage that people wanted taking to their house on a pair of trucks. These trucks had big wheels, 2 big wheels, and shafts which my grandfather stepped inside of and either pulled or pushed the luggage to the appropriate address. Sometimes in the summer my grandfather would pick me up at the bottom of the road where I'd be playing and sit me on the trucks and push me home. And if I close my eyes like this for a moment, I can still imagine and almost feel the movement the truck made, a sort of swaying up and down. And if I listen very carefully I can hear the noise that the ironclad wheels made as they went over different surfaces on the road and on the pavement. My dad was a bus conductor when I knew him until he retired, but of course he'd had other jobs. In the 1418 war he was called up as a soldier. Now my dad had probably never been out of Poole or Bournemouth in his life, and so they put him in the Welsh Fusiliers. Sometime later during the war they moved him into the Gloucester Regiment, which I suppose was a bit nearer to Bournemouth. He never told me much about the war. I know he served in France, and I know he was wounded in the leg, which left him with a very slight limp, and I knew he also suffered a little bit with having come in contact with mustard gas. when he came out from the war, times were hard in England, and he had a variety of jobs. I know he worked in a butcher's shop, and as a consequence of this, he wouldn't eat sausages or faggots. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions about the butchers of those times, and possibly of these times. He also did some entertaining, because he used to entertain a bit. He could tap dance, and when I was young, I remember he had some makeup in the house. And I know he also had a little card printed that said Charles W. Smart, light comedian and dancer. He also sold ice cream somewhere around Boscombe Pier, but of course this was all long before me. Regarding the light comedian bit, he was always interested in comedy programs on the radio when we got electricity, and I remember going home and listening to some shows with him. Itmar and Stand Easy were two of the shows I remember. He also liked going to the Hippodrome, although when we were being brought up, I think the only time we went as a family was to the Christmas pantomimes. But he sang a lot of musical songs over the years, and taught me a lot, although he didn't intend to, I don't think. He didn't talk to me much, he didn't say a lot. One thing I do remember him saying was, don't believe everything you hear and only half of what you see. Don't believe everything you hear and only half of what you see. Now, what about Mum? Well, Mum did what most mums in my neighbourhood did at that time. She worked. She was in service, which means living in a boarding house or maybe a big private house, and doing all the work, all the waiting and scrubbing and cleaning for the owner of the house. That was when my dad met her. I don't know much about that either. I know they got married somewhere at Ripley Congregational Church near Ringwood. More of that later. I think my mother always worked from then on, usually doing housework or cleaning for somebody's big house. And then later on in life, when I was older, she worked in one or two shops in the neighbourhood, serving in sweet shops. She also worked in a canteen later on in the youth club, but that was for love. Then I remember parties. I mean parties for people in the neighbourhood, not parties at home. Every year the Bournemouth Corporation Transport used to hold a party at the town hall called the Tram Party. This was for friends and members of families whose parent or somebody worked for the transport department. So Dad being a bus conductor, we qualified. This party was held at a large ballroom at the back of the town hall where the multi-storey car park is now. Now I remember these parties vividly. I remember the excitement of looking forward to it, and I remember going to it, although I can't remember how we went, probably by bus. I know there was a tea because I've seen photographs, but I can't remember the tea. The only thing I remember is the entertainment. This took place after tea. The hall was cleared while we were all packed off in another smaller hall and played games. And then we came back in the larger hall, which by now had chairs in them, and we sat and watched a concert. Again, I remember little of the concerts, except a man called Billy Wright, who entertained, and he compared the concert as far as I remember. And the very last bit was a bit where he finished up with having children on the stage, rather as they do in pantomimes at the moment. Now, there were prizes at the end for whoever answered the brightest, or I don't really remember what the prizes were for, but there were boys' prizes, tins of soldiers, books, games, and then there were some for girls, some soft cuddly toys, and in particular I remember dolls. Now Billy Wright went through these children, talking to them and gradually getting them off the stage one by one until he was left. And as in modern day entertainment, he was left usually with a nice cute little girl. Now this little girl had been quite bright, and he was talking to her, and then he asked her what prize she would like. So she looked all round and she didn't be able to decide. He said, well, would you like a doll? And no, she didn't want a doll. And would you like something else? No, she didn't want something else. So in the end he said, well, "What do you want?" So he bent down so that she could whisper in his ear, and he looked up with a big smile on his face and said she'd rather have a coconut. And yes, there were coconuts, and yes, she had one. There are other parties as well. There were some held at St Andrew's Hall in Shelbourne Road, which is still there, and some held in the Drill Hall, that's still there as well in Holderness Road. I often wondered how and why they had all these parties, and then when my church, St George's Methodist Church Boscombe, had its 40th anniversary somewhere in the 70s, I was asked to go through the Daily Echo archives, which at that time were in Springbourne Library. Now these were not on microfilm as they are now, but literally the echoes, and I read all through them all from 1930 up until the then 70s. And what I had to do was jot down anything I thought might be of interest to use during our 40th anniversary celebrations. I didn't in fact find much that would help us, but what I did find was this. The parties I had wondered about, they were for the poor people of the neighbourhood. Looking back, I knew we were poor, so it didn't really matter, because we all were. I'd now like to sing 2 choruses that Billy Wright taught me all those years ago, well, me and a few hundred others. I have no accompaniment, so you'll have to put up with just my voice. Where do all the fishes get their names from that live at the bottom of the sea? They can't read or write, they don't know their ABC. When you get home tonight, ask Mum or ask Daddy. Where do all the fishes get their names from that live at the bottom of the sea? And this one. Who put the stone in the plum? It's a mystery to me how it's done. And if anyone asks you the question, tell them this for fun, that the man who put the milk in the coconut must have put the stone in the plum. There we are, that's the 2 songs that have lived with me, and I'm sure other kids from the time. And then, as the films say, then came the war. Now, the first thing I remember about the war really was the gas masks. Now, I hated gas masks. Ever since, I've always hated the smell of rubber. Now, whether that came from gas masks or not, I'm not sure, because prior to that, whenever I went to school dentist, the first thing they did to you was put a rubber bib round your neck, and I think probably the smell of rubber started then. Anyhow, back to the gas mask. We had to go, everybody had to have a gas mask. We had to go to what we called Groveley Manor, which is now called Shelley Park, and there we lined up and had our gas mask fitted. This was quite scary. We stood in long lines, somebody helped us put the gas mask on. That in itself was a little bit tricky. I had thick elastic bands, they had to be adjusted to make them fit. And they had to be airproof. You had to be able to breathe in and out, but not have any loose air coming in. And then a man would come along and hold a card in front of the gas mask, and you had to breathe in and see if you held it to the gas mask with a suction. I lost my gas mask once. For some reason I left at the bus stop in Christchurch with my mum. So I think I laid awake probably all night wondering what was going to happen to us. But the gas mask was handed in, as they mostly were, and nothing much happened. The second thing I remember about the war are the soldiers. Now, I came in contact with the soldiers after Dunkirk, when we were evacuated from France, the armies. A lot of soldiers came over to here and had to go into places to be rested and cleaned up and brought back to ready to go back and fight again, I suppose. Now in the school next to me, Malmesbury Park School, we were off for a couple of weeks, it may have been 3, while a lot of soldiers, they seemed to be French Canadians or Moroccans. I imagine they were regiments of French colonies, but I'm not absolutely sure. I remember when they arrived, they were, I don't know, dejected, down and out and lifeless almost. After they'd been there for a few weeks, during which time they were allowed to roam around the neighbourhood, and we got to know one or two, just to sort of nod to. Being next door to the school, we saw them quite often. I do remember, however, that when they lined up and got ready to go, I do remember they looked very different. Even at that age, I was then 10. I could see that they looked smarter and more like soldiers. I also remember the school windows being taped up with masking tape so that if any bombs dropped near the glass wouldn't shatter but more or less hold themselves in place. In some houses and public buildings they built outside of some major windows what they call blast walls, again for the same purpose, to protect the blast from getting in and smashing the windows. While we were at school, we each had a box, a little tin box, and inside that was some rations, emergency rations. I know there were some Horlicks tablets in, and I think some chocolate and a couple of biscuits. Each tin had our names on it, but we didn't look after them, they were kept somewhere. Now, the idea of those tins was this. If there was an alert on, an air raid, when it was time to go home from school, we weren't allowed to go until the all clear was sounded. And whilst the air raid was on, we had to go and sit in a corridor which had been reinforced in some way. While we were in there, I think the teachers read to us, or we sort of played word games. Now, we sometimes stayed in after the class, but never once did we stay long enough to have these tins opened and allow us to have this feast. We never saw the end of the tins, and we were never told what happened, but I know what us schoolboys thought. We thought the teachers opened them one night after we'd gone home and had a big feast. Who knows? I remember the blackouts. Street lights were, if not out, were turned down so low that they might as well have been out. Buses were in semi-darkness, and the conductors had little lights on them so that they could see what money they were being given for tickets. I remember going out during the blackout. I remember going down to the library in the blackout. So we soon got used to it. Oh, and cars, what few there were, had white paint on their sides and on their front mudguards and on the front of their wings. All in all, it was a bit of an exciting time, the blackout. I remember at school we had book drives where we had to take books and they were going to be collected and sent off to be pulped down and used for something or other. I remember I was helping at a senior school by then at Porchester Road, and I was helping sort the books, and even at that age I could still remember thinking, well, this seems a waste. It seems somehow wrong to get rid of books like that. I remember also we collected pots and pans and took them to a particular place. I remember the gates of some parks, King's Park, the gates were taken down, fences were taken down, metal fences, and the idea was that these were going off to build Spitfires and aeroplanes. I'm not too sure how many saucepans ended up as part of a Spitfire, but I suppose it helped us feel we were doing something. Then there were places called British restaurants. There was a British restaurant in the hall by Wesley Church, just round the corner from Shelbourne Road and built in the main road, Holderness Road. That's also gone now. But in this restaurant you could go, and for a very reasonable price you could have a dinner. And it was the first time I had ever had 3 courses for dinner. Soup, entree and afters. It was brilliant. I only ever went there 1 or 2 times with a friend, but it was good. The Conservative Club on the corner of Holderness Road at one time hung a uniform on a hanger, on a post or something, on the pavement. It was supposed to be belonging to a German pilot. I know us kids rather doubted that, but there we are. Lots of things were done to help us all feel that we were playing our part in the war, and it was a good thing. There were real guns dotted around the town, of course. On roofs you could sometimes see them, and I know there was an anti-aircraft gun in a garden of a house near St Clement's Road. The beach was closed, of course. You couldn't get on the beach officially. There was all barbed wire and great metal traps all along the road. One of the things that happened at the beginning of the war was that all towns like Bournemouth that had piers, and we had two, they were ordered to blow a hole up in the middle, and that was duly done, Boscombe and Bournemouth Beach. The idea was that the Germans wouldn't be able to land and drive up and use the pier. Now, I know they might not have been able to do that, but I'm sure it wouldn't have stopped them invading if they wanted to. As I say, there were guns around the town, and there was even some guns at the back of Dean Court. They were trying to save the football ground. We're still trying to do it, really. I'd like now just to mention briefly air raids. There weren't many in Bournemouth. There was nothing much here to bomb. Southampton, of course, and Portsmouth got it much worse because of the docks. But nevertheless, we did have some, and I just mentioned three. The main air raid I remember was on May the 23rd, 1943. It was a Sunday dinner time, approximately 1 o'clock, and some fighter bombers swept over Bournemouth at rooftop level. I think they swept over twice, firing cannons and dropping bombs. All in all, they only took a couple of minutes, and by the time it finished, they had left devastation as regards buildings. Shamrock and Ramblers building in Holderness Road was destroyed. Bobby's in the square was set on fire. Bill's was half destroyed. There were hotels hit. The Bunchen Church at Richmond Hill was destroyed. And two hotels in particular were the scene of tragedy. The Metropole in Holderness Road by the Lansdowne and the Central Hotel. These were all full of servicemen, it being dinner time. Figures for military casualties weren't announced, but it was an awful lot. And it was a day I won't forget, ever. Another one, an air raid that was personal to me on August the 12th. I think it must have been 1944. A bomb dropped behind my house in Shelbourne Road. Now, behind my house there was a space, a sort of a yard, and then there was a double-storey building which was part of a garage store. The bomb pitched in the land in between, destroyed the store altogether, blew out all the windows in my house, blew the roof tiles off, and blew the doors off the hinges. Fortunately, nobody was hurt, and as I thought at the time, unfortunately, I wasn't there. I was staying at my auntie's for a holiday or something, I suppose, my auntie near Ringwood. My dad and two of my sisters were in the front garden at the time on fire watch, but as I say, nobody was hurt. But we did have to move out of the house, and we moved down to 5 St Clement's Road until after the war, when the house was restored and we were able to move back. And another one which meant a lot to a lot of people in Bournemouth was on November the 16th, 1940, 3:30 in the morning. 6 landmines drifted quietly out of the sky and destroyed vast areas in the Bennett Road and St Leonard's Road area. Also hit was Alma Road schools on the corner of Alma Road and Stokewood Road. This, fortunately being at night, caused no loss of life, but made for some alterations in the schooling of children of my age in Bournemouth, because of course Alma Road was a big school and had a lot of children, so they were dispersed to different schools, which made moves for us. One of the schools they were moved to was the building in Porchester Road, which became Porchester Road Senior School, and the building in Lowther Road, which became Lowther Road School for girls. Now, because neither school was really suitable for the numbers, the education committee decided that they would split the attendance. What happens was this: these schools were both for children over 11, senior schools in fact. What happened was that one week we would go to Porchester Road School in the morning and to Lyther Road School in the afternoon, and the girls of course went vice versa. And so at dinner time, lunchtime, we all crossed our paths and went to the other school. Now, why they didn't let us do 1 week at one school and 1 week at another, I don't quite know. Maybe the rules came down from the same people that decided that my dad should go in the Welsh regiment and the Gloucester regiment. There were not many bombs in Bournemouth, as I said, but I'll tell you this: to hear one is enough. Everybody in the war played some sort of part. My dad was in the Home Guard for a while. My three sisters, one was in the Civil Defence, one was in the ambulance service, and one was in St John's ambulance. Mum, well, Mum just carried on keeping things together. The war ended in 1945, and I remember that I was down at the square late at night, till 12 o'clock in fact, joining in the merriment and dancing that was going on. It was getting a little bit boring because the only music we had to dance to was coming through some sort of speaker. But then just before midnight, an American Army jazz band arrived, I don't know where from, and climbed on top of a small bus shelter that used to be in the middle of the square. And so we had some real live jazz music to see us on the way home. During those years, life went on, of course. Sunday was a day for family walks. Sunday afternoons we would walk as a family either up to Queen's Park, along to the pond, walk round the pond and chat and walk all the way back. Sometimes a bus ride to Christchurch or to Poole. Poole was interesting because if my dad was with us, he would point out various places where he had lived. He lived a lot in Poole and apparently moved about a lot. Horseshoe Common was another place we used to go to. I loved the pond down there where there was newts, and I sometimes went down there to play with boys, and not just when I went out with my mum or my mum and dad. The streets were our playground as well, of course. There were not many cars. There were still horse and carts around, of course. The dust carts for the dustmen, they were pulled by great big horses. The coal merchants had horse and carts. The railway delivered stuff by horse and cart, and of course the bakers did. At one time, of course, we used to tell the time by the horses from the Co-op bakery in Cleveland Road, because they used to come down our road on their way home at a certain time we knew it was tea time. There were strange people about in those days as well, as the same as there are now. I mean, they didn't quite cause the publicity and fear there appears to be now. Maybe there weren't as many, or maybe we just hear about them more now. I know one old chap used to live in Sumrup, Shelbourne Road, in a garage or a shed. He always wore a grubby mac and he had a bandage round his head and he had a long white beard. We called him, although not to his face, we called him Father Christmas. Now the other guy was a little bit different. He was rather a simple sort of chap, lovely flashing eyes, a nice smile. He used to wear white, what we would call trainers, but in those days were called plimsolls, and a big peak cap. And he used to deliver vegetables for a local greengrocer. Now for some reason he was called Saviour. Yes, Saviour. And he used to stop and talk to us boys. Don't ever remember me getting off of his bike. He just used to talk to us. Now he had a little hole, or what looked like a hole in one cheek, like a very deep dimple. Now he used to tell us it was a bullet hole. Now as kids, I'm not sure we really thought it was true, but we certainly pretended to believe it. And then, of course, one of the places we frequented in those days was the Roxy Cinema, which was in Holderness Road, and the back of it was in Melbourne Road, which is just off of Shelbourne Road, a little cul-de-sac. The cinema building is still there, but no longer a cinema. I originally went there for Saturday matinees, children's shows, and then later on went there for what I call grown-up films as well. I can still recall the inside vividly. It had little oblong lights around the auditorium, and they had what I assume were records being played, and the last one to be played was a tune called Indian Summer. And towards the end of that record, the lights gradually dimmed from yellow and turned red, and of course the record stopped and the curtains parted, and there was the screen. Not, as the books would have us believe, a silver screen, but this was more like a cracked yellow. I always remember the cowboys from where I sat, which was probably in the front row in the cheap seats, and the cowboys had long tall hats, and that's what I think cowboys wore. Every so often somebody would come round and spray, yes, spray, a wet spray round you, a pump spray of some sort of air freshener. You could actually feel the wet if it pitched on you. I never know whether it was to freshen the air or whether it was to quiet down anything that they thought was unruly behaviour. Then there were the shops, so different from now. Many of them were long, dark shops. I remember one in particular which was called Fowler's, the post office on the corner of Avon Road. This was a long, dark shop, and as you walked down there was a centre shelf, as it were, stretching the top with goods on, and when you got down there were some more goods on the counter. The butter, cheese, eggs, the cat. Yes, a cat. Most grocers had a cat because of the mice that were always around. Then Butler's in Boscombe, which was a big store, sold all sorts of things, clothes and all sorts of things. And they also had a cash operating scheme which involved putting money into a little pot, screwing it onto a pot which was on a wire, pulling a handle on this wire around from the department you were at to the cash desk. And if there was any change or receipt to come back, they also came back, so you could stand in Butler's and watch all these little cash boxes whizzing around on wires. It was quite good. Then on the corner of Cyril Road, which is just off Shelbourne Road, only a couple of minutes walk from my house, there was a shop that we always called Bell's, but it turns out I think his name was Bales, Mr. Bale. Now he was a grocer, quite a small shop, a grocer, but he sold everything, firelighters, sweets, cloths, polish, everything. A little general store, I suppose. I remember he had a display of sweets on the window, and if we went up there to spend, the first thing we had to do was glue our noses to the window and decide which sweet we were going to have a go for. The thing that fascinated me about Bales was that he also sold paraffin in the shop. You would take your can in, and after getting your groceries and that ready, you would take your can, undo it, go across to the paraffin dispenser, which is like a pump affair, pump your paraffin in, put the lid on, plonk it on the counter or on the floor, wipe his hands in a cloth and serve you. It wouldn't do these days, I'm sure. And I'll tell you this, if ever there was a market for paraffin flavoured groceries, he'd make a fortune. During this time, Boscombe School was built in Ashley Road, and also the Odeon Cinema, which was then the number one, which became the number one cinema in Bournemouth. It's now a bingo hall as far as I know, or a bingo palace I suppose. I used to go there for Saturday mornings to a children's club where we had games and competitions and films, of course, and of course a serial that had a cliffhanger at the end of every morning. You're going to have to put up with one verse of a song now which we learnt, and we used to sing every week, not just in Bournemouth, but all over the country, and probably all over the world. Just one verse, I promise. Every Saturday morning, where do we go? Getting into mischief, oh dear no. To the Mickey Mouse Club with our badges on. Every Saturday morning at the Odeon. There you go. Now, not many people had holidays like today. Our holiday consisted of going up to my grand's cottage, who lived in Avon, which is between Christchurch and Ringwood. She lived there with a daughter, my Auntie Elsie, who had lived with her after, I think, her boyfriend was killed in the First World War, and she looked after Gran. Now, I remember my granny very well. Lived in a cottage, very old cottage, thick walls, no running water initially. All the water came from a well which was in front of the house, and I used to watch people draw the water up. I never got old enough to do it, on a long pole with a hook to which we attached a bucket. They'd used to take a quick glance in the bucket, make sure there was nothing untoward floating around. If so, they were scooped out and thrown on the grass. And then the water was placed in a tub at the back of the house under shelter and allowed to settle. And that was used for drinking, washing, whatever. I remember my granny, a small woman dressed in black, always smelt of lavender and peppermints, had podgy hands, and she used to sit knitting gloves with yellow wool. She used to knit these gloves, as a lot of people did in that area, and sell them to somebody in Ringwood. And they got paid a few pence for each pair of gloves, I believe. It was an exciting cottage to be in, a long country garden with an old pigsty in it, a brook outside the garden that we could go down to and play. There was a farm opposite. We were allowed to go and play there, and play in the barn, and play in the stream. Milk was collected from the farm, and if the farm has run out of milk, we used to be able to go and buy a pint from a house down the lane. That house is still there in the lane, and so is the farm as I speak. Sundays was day for going to chapel. Now, chapel was at Ripley Congregational Church, and this was a good, I don't know, 3 miles away, I should think. We used to walk there. We used to all get ready by a certain time. We had to walk there and push Gran in what was called a chair, which was like a big push chair. And we used to walk there and back. Every Sunday we were there. I think we were there for about 3 weeks. Quite near my mum's school, and she used to have to walk there and back every day. And that school's still there, Ripley. And then there was my Sunday school. I went to Sunday school at Life and Advent Chapel in Ashley Road. I went there initially, I think, and so did my sisters, because we had an auntie that used to go there. I don't know much about the theology of the chapel there. I do remember at one time an old man getting up in the middle of a service and saying something about the earth was flat, but I'd rather not comment on that. In their early days, I know they had baptisms on the beach, but that had stopped by the time I went there. I remember the outings. We used to have an outing in the summer where we go by bus or train, various places. I remember we always had to take our Macs. I also remember that we prayed that there wouldn't be rain. We went to good places. We went to Studland, Lyndhurst Road. The last one I remember, we went to Pelham's in Kinson. I always remember that because they were mowing the grass. And whenever I go down to Pelham's, I think of that. Whenever we used to get to the outing, the first thing that happened was, after we sort of pitched on the site, as it were, the men of the chapel would quickly get out what was clock golf, like putting, where they put little numbers round in a circle and putted. We couldn't understand this, but of course these men were quite old. Some of them were probably 35 or 40. Then we had races and we had scrambles where somebody with a tin of sweets, I don't know where they got them from during the war, they would throw them out in fistfuls and we would all run for them. But like good folk, they made sure that we all got some sweets. I remember once at Studland, a boy broke his arm. Yeah, we sure had fun at these outings. And once a year, we had an anniversary. This was held in a hall in Gladstone Road because the chapel in Ashio wasn't big enough. I remember it was at night, because I remember going there in the dark, and I remember the ray of light as you opened the door to walk in. On the right, as you walked in, were the ladies of the chapel, who had obviously been preparing the teas. They were there with their hats on, and big colourful aprons or overalls almost. Again, I don't remember the teas, but I know after the tea, we all assembled on the platform, all us children, the little ones in the front and the larger ones at the back, so that they could all be seen and heard. And then we had a sort of a concert, playlets, songs, readings, all sorts of things to show what we had learned and also to show off our talents. And we sang choruses. Wide, wide as the ocean, joy, 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 I am Happy. And then the moment we were waiting for were the prizes. After we'd had the concert, the man for the evening came along and gave some sort of a talk, which we tried to ignore. And then we were all issued with prizes, book prizes, a couple of which I still have at home. These prizes were attendance or exams, but everybody had something. The one worrying thing about going to Sunday school was texts. You see, what happened was every week we were given a text at the end of Sunday school, and these texts had a picture on one side and a little reading at the bottom. Sometimes 2 or 3 lines, sometimes 5 or 6. And we had to learn these and stand up and say them out loud the following Sunday. Now, learning these texts in the week wasn't very hard, but it did prey on your mind a bit. Was it thee, thou, or thine, or... We had to get over the words, and the following Sunday, class by class, we were invited to stand up and have a go. Now, all the years I was there, I suppose I was probably there for at least 6. However the struggle, and some children weren't able to speak very well, however the struggle, I never remember anyone not trying. It was a good place. Then were the scripture exams. Some of us were invited to go in for a scripture examination where we had special coaching, and then we sat for an exam, all at desks with an invigilator in front of us and a clock to say go, and a whistle or a buzzer or a loud clap to say we finish. Now they used to cause some worry as well. First of all, there was the maps we usually had to draw. Now then, which sea was the biggest? Was it the Red Sea or the Dead Sea? Whereabouts did the towns come? Which one was at the top of the map and which went in the middle and which was at the bottom? And what about the journeys of St. Paul? We know he went to Malta and Cyprus, but where was Tyre and Sidon and other places with harder names? What Life in Advent gave me was a grounding in the Christian faith, but also love and caring and a feeling that we all matter, and a feeling of being able to stand up for what we believe in, even to stand up alone sometimes. And there was a chorus, dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm and dare to make it known. Life in Advent is still in Ashley Road, and at the moment I'm still going to a monthly coffee morning, and there are 2 people there who were there when I was there. Where does childhood end now? Well, mine ended the day after school. I left school at Christmas 1943. I started work straight after Christmas at a departmental store in Bournemouth called J.J. Allen's. I started on the Monday and I celebrated my 14th birthday on the Wednesday. Not quite the same as these days. Then followed 3 very formative years for me. I started going to dance halls, cinemas with a gang of boys and one or two girls. There were 14 cinemas in Bournemouth at that time. I joined the Army Cadets for 3 years, and that was quite informative, playing at soldiers. Most of this period of my life, I suppose, was boy-girl stuff, getting to know girls a little bit more. I soon discovered they're not quite the same as sisters. I was married in 1955 and left Springbourne. I still go back. The houses are the same, except the doors are all new, and most houses have double glazing. But there's still a fish and chip shop on the corner of Cleveland Road, and still a conservative club on the bottom of Shelbourne Road. Still an off licence on the other corner of Shelbourne Road, and I still have my memories, strong, clear, vivid memories of a Springbourne childhood. I'd like to finish this tape by reading something that I wrote about in June 1980 for my local church magazine. I'll remember Ripley. I don't just mean the locality, which is near Sopley, but the Congregational Church there. Of course I remember it. It was where my mother and father were married during the 1914-18 war. It was where my 3 sisters and I were christened. It was where we sometimes went to Sunday school. Perhaps I had better explain that last bit. You see, my grandmother's home was at Avon. We spent many childhood holidays there. On Sundays we always went to Ripley for morning service and Sunday school. The school was upstairs, and I can still remember the warm welcome we always received. It amazed me as a child that the superintendent would call us by name and seemed to know all about us and what we'd been up to, although at least a year had passed since we visited his school. A highlight of our visit was getting our star card marked for attendance, for in those days we received prizes at the end of the year depending on our individual records. Eventually my gran died, and an auntie lived on in the cottage, my Auntie Elsie. Every Sunday, come rain or shine, she went to Ripley, for some years by tricycle but mostly on foot. Ripley was a major part of her life. The final memory I have of Ripley is of a funeral. When my auntie died, the cortege went from Burton. We travelled to Sopley, then on to Avon, then through the lane she had known and loved so well to Ripley. A simple service, then a short drive to the cemetery at Sopley. After a few years, the congregation at Ripley had dwindled to 2 or 3 faithful souls, and it was found impossible to keep the church going, and so it was closed. For a few years it stood derelict and forlorn, a monument to former days and former lives. I was out there at Easter time, and it has been pulled down. A little piece of history has gone. All that was there was a space, but I'll remember Ripley. I'll remember Ripley.